Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and Teamfight Tactics has just put out the patch notes for patch 10.8, and this brings with it a bunch of buffs, nerfs, adjustments, also some new galaxies, and a brand new unit, Xerath. And now this is not live as this video is going live, it'll be live up tomorrow, but we're going to go through the patch notes here today and kind of predict how these are going to impact the meta and how it's going to impact the game and how you should play differently when this does go live tomorrow. So, first off, we got a new unit, Xerath here. So here are some of the details. He's a tier 5 unit. He's a Dark Star Sorcerer. Won't go over the nitty-gritties of his stats. He does have 30/80 mana, so he requires 50 mana to cast, which is pretty quick. He should be casting relatively quickly, especially if you slap a mana item or two on him. And his ultimate is Abyssal Bombardment. Xerath will transform, and then he'll summon meteors to strike random foes instead of his normal attacks for the next 6 or 8 seconds if you get him up to 2-star. If you get him to 3-star, it's basically for the rest of the fight. Meteors will deal 300 or 400 magic damage upon impact, and if they kill the target, then all adjacent enemies will also take about half as much damage in splash damage, and then they're going to be stunned. So this guy sounds like a really big capstone for both Darkstar and for Sorcerer compositions, and so, you know, slots right in there the same as Lux. So obviously in any place where you'd want Lux, Xerath is another great choice to go later in the game. Into some of the sorcerer like reroll builds that often, have 4 and maybe want to branch into 6 sorcerers. Xerath would be a good choice. Also just Darkstar builds that built around Jhin, like 6 Darkstar. You have a little bit more flexibility in the late game for a big carry. Although I still think those comps are going to trend towards loading up a Jhin and having him just one-shot everybody, or a Shaco to do the same. Xerath is another good option into the late game. Okay, on to the new systems. There's going to be 2 new galaxies added. Now, we've already had 3 galaxies that we've been playing with for the past couple weeks, but there are 2 more adding in, Trade Sector and Super Dense Galaxy. So the Trade Sector says players will get 1 free reroll every single round. And yeah, that sounds a little crazy. That's going to obviously speed up the game a whole lot. People are going to be very strong a lot earlier. Everyone getting a free reroll every single turn. It's essentially like giving everybody 2 gold every turn. So you can imagine the relative income is going to be a lot higher. The relative power level of your composition is going to be a lot higher. I really actually think this galaxy in particular will benefit those builds that like to level up very quickly. You're thinking things like Cybernetics, or old rebels that wanted to get up to level 8 or 9 as quickly as possible. Those kind of builds that just want to be like leveling as much as they can instead of rerolling at 5 or 6 or level 7 are actually going to benefit the most from this. Now you might think that, oh, the reroll compositions, well, they get extra rerolls. Well, that's true, but if you're playing like, say, Protectors or like the Mech Pilot build that wants to like reroll at levels 5 or 6, then you're already rerolling pretty early, and one of the big advantages is that you're rerolling earlier than everybody else. And you're going to do 3 or 4 or 5 rerolls every turn a lot earlier than anyone else is rerolling because they're still trying to save up gold to level. And so you hit a power spike earlier. But in this Trade Sector galaxy, everybody gets a reroll. So the builds that are saying, I'm just going to spend my gold on leveling up, are still getting that 1 reroll per turn. Whereas you go as a reroll like heavy builds, you're, say, level 5 or 6, and you're saying, I'm going to spend 8 gold to reroll this turn. Okay, you get 1 more. You go from 4 to 5 rerolls, as opposed to the other builds go from 0 to 1. And those builds that go from 0 to 1 reroll are going to proportionally benefit a whole lot more. So I think if you're in the Trade Sector galaxy, you probably want to be focusing on builds that want to level up as much as possible, rather than builds that want to reroll a whole lot at levels 5 or 6 or even 7. You want to be hitting those level 8s and 9s as soon as you can. The second galaxy, Super Dense Galaxy, upon reaching level 5, players will receive a free Force of Nature. So everyone just gets a free unit slot. And it's also an item, so if you are playing Cybernetics, you can just slap that on a Cyber just to give them the bonus health and attack damage. So that's a little bit of a benefit to them. I kind of think this does a lot of the same things. This will really reward... I actually think this one a little bit less than Trade Sector, but it does probably still benefit the ones that want to level up a lot, because you can fit in more synergies. You can, if you want to fit in 9 units, like a lot of those builds that want to level up, I'm thinking Cybernetics again, just because it's like the easiest example. They want to use 9 units because they can use 6 Cybers plus like Kale and Misfortune and Thresh to round out some synergies. And now they just need to get to level 8 to do that, and so this Force of Nature will help a lot. But I really think this will help everybody, and it's a little unclear. Some builds that say, I want to reroll at level 5 or 6, they have good things they want to add in, They just don't want to spend the gold to level up, so maybe Force of Nature helps them as well. So I think that's kind of universally good for everybody. Every builder kind of wants this super dense galaxy, and it will definitely reward leveling up quickly. You want to hit level 5 as soon as you can to get that and hit your power spike before everybody else does, and keep a win streak going early. You don't really want to be delaying your level up in that galaxy. You want to hit level 5 ASAP. Okay, there's about a 50% chance of getting a special galaxy versus a normal game, with the trade sector and super dense galaxies going to be a little bit more favored than others. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I thought I saw something that was like 12.5% for the trade sector and super dense, and about 7.5 for the other ones, and it adds up to like 49 something percent, or about 50%. So that'll be good. One of my big complaints in the first iteration of the galaxies was I played like my first 6 or 7 games on the patch, and I never got a galaxy. So seeing them increase the odds, the overall odds of finding a special galaxy is pretty cool. It's probably the better way of playing. It's the whole name of the set. You want to be playing in those. Okay, other system stuff. This is actually really important here. This section about the win-loss streak, the base damage, and player damage. You might like kind of gloss over this, like, okay, they're changing some numbers around, but it's going to be a really big impact on the way the game is played. And without playing a whole lot, I haven't played too terribly much on the PvE to really know how these are going to work out. But the win and loss streaks essentially go. They ramp up slower. So you used to hit maximum gold, the 3 gold per streak, at 4+ wins, and now it's only going to come up at 5+ wins, and you don't ramp up to 2 gold until 4 wins, and so on. So the streaks get a little bit harder to get going, and so it doesn't reward those who are win streaking just a little bit. If you're still on a big win streak, it's going to be roughly equivalent, but if you're on you're going to lose 3 or 4 rounds in a row, you're actually going to get a little bit less gold. And they've basically said they don't want to reward fully open forting where you just like guarantee get a losing streak, and that's something I definitely agree with. Anybody who's followed my Underlords videos knows that I am not a fan of open forting, where you just like don't play anything and you're intentionally going on like a 5 or 6 or 7 round losing streak just to ensure that you get that losing streak gold. I don't like that. I don't think it's fun. I don't think it's engaging. I don't think it's compelling gameplay. So I'm happy that they are trying to nerf that as much as they can. Otherwise, the base damage per stages has changed up a little bit. And before, the damage output was essentially you would just take your base damage plus damage output per unit that survived. So if you on a certain round, you would just take the amount of damage plus the number of units that are still alive. And it didn't matter how strong those units were or anything like that. But most of the damage you were taking was in the base damage per the stage. That's why it would ramp up. And I really didn't like that. I thought it made the game end at like the same time all the time in the middle of like stage 6. Or like the end of stage 5 and the beginning of stage 6 is when you'd get like 6 of the 8 people getting eliminated within a span of 2 or 3 rounds, just because the damage was kind of so consistent. And now so that they're essentially nerfing the damage per stage, and they're increasing the amount of damage that the units deal who are still alive. So if you're losing by a lot, if you're getting crushed by 6, 7, 8 opposing units still surviving, you're going to take a lot more damage now. But if you're just narrowly losing by 1 or 2 units, you're going to be taking a lot less. And I think that should hopefully delineate, the people who are, reasonably strong, but kind of middle of the pack. They're not like dominating, but they're not super far behind. And it should give them a little bit of an edge over those people who were kind of that full-on open forting and they were getting crushed by 5, 6, 7 units. They're going to be taking a lot more damage. And so I really like that change. I think that's going to be a very good adjustment to hopefully introduce a little bit more separation between the players. So it's not always everyone gets eliminated on exactly the same round, because most of the damage is baked into the baseline damage and not so much in how much you lost by. All right, so getting on to some of the new traits and some of the balance changes there. We've got a bunch of new traits. These are, I think they're called chase traits, where basically you need a spatula item in order to complete them. As we got 9 Blade Masters, 9 Dark Star, 6 Infiltrators, 6 Protectors, 9 Rebels, 8 Sorcerers. So these are basically just scaled up version of the other max version of these, but you do need spatula items to complete them. And they all seem pretty reasonably powerful. The 9 Blade Masters probably seems the most powerful. 100% chance to proc the Blade Master bonus attacks. I've rarely even seen anybody go for 6 Blade Master, so I highly doubt that's going to be a very competitive build, but that one sounds the strongest on paper. Next up, the Celestial Healing percentage has been slightly buffed at 4 and 6 Celestials. Now, that was a fairly unpopular build. I rarely saw anybody run more than just 2 Celestials, but I felt like that one could be potentially powerful. I know Caston got a couple of buffs in the previous patch, so maybe a Celestial build kind of comes out of this with an extra 10% healing at 4 Celestials. Cybernetic has been nerfed at 6, which was one of the most powerful builds. It's lost 50 HP and 5 attack damage, but that'll be spread out across all of your 6 Cyber, so really that's a substantial loss of health across the board for 6 Cyber builds. Also paired with the fact that they're added another new 5-cost unit, the Xerath, that makes finding Echo, that key 6th Cybernetic, is going to be much more rare and hard to find. So the Mech Pilot has been, the Super Mech has been adjusted. Instead of gaining all of the pilot's health, they gain a set amount plus 50% of the pilot's health. So this should probably buff it a little bit if you're like just getting the Mech Pilot online or the Super Mech online. But by the time you get into the late game with like a level 7, 8, or level 9 mech, if you get all of them up to 3-star, it's going to be a little bit less healthy. The spell damage has also been nerfed across the board actually it's only been nerfed at kind of level 7 and 8. So basically your late game damage output from the Super Mech has been slightly nerfed. So he's not going to be quite as strong once you get him up to level 7 or level 8. That's the combined star levels of all the units. So if you have like a 3-star Annie, a 3-star Rumble, and a 1-star Fizz, that's a level 7 because you go 3, 3, 1, and so on. Mercenaries, a little bit of visual upgrade. That's awesome, so you can actually see what you upgraded them. Space Pirates, this one is probably the most fun upgrade. The item drop chance, which is kind of the whole reason to ever try to go for Space Pirates, has been increased. I haven't really seen that be successful, at least not up in Grandmaster and Challenger lobbies. But I want it to be good because it sounds so much fun when it does work. Just kind of a completely different axis of playing the game where you just don't care too much about like good synergies. You just want to slam a bunch of items. I hope that becomes like a reasonably viable composition, because I think that would be really cool. And let's see what else. Sorcerers have been slightly buffed at 4 sorcerers. Now that's interesting because I always thought sorcerers, and especially Star Guardian sorcerer builds, have been quite strong at 4 sorcerers. But there's some other changes that we'll talk about in a minute that's going to nerf them. So on the balance, it's kind of hard to say exactly where they'll pan out. Okay, under the champions, tier 1 champions, Caitlyn has been buffed at tier, actually across the board, has gotten a little bit more damage, especially impactful at 3-star. She went up to 3,000 damage. That's basically going to one-shot anybody in the game, unless they have a bunch of items stacked up on them. Caitlyn, 3-star, might be a bit more of a carry than she used to be. I think you'll put a higher priority her on 2-star. She's definitely going to one-shot people instead of almost one-shotting them. An extra 500 damage will definitely do that. So I think a 2-star Caitlyn is going to be a high priority in the early game going forward. Same with Xayah, who got an increased attack speed bonus. She's going to be quite strong at 1 and 2-star, unchanged at 3-star though. So Caitlyn and Xayah are definitely going to move up in the priority list for your early game power, even if they don't really fit into too many good late game compositions. Zoe stun duration has been buffed at 3-star. It's pretty rare to get a Zoe 3-star, even in those kind of heavy reroll builds, but the damage has been increased at a 1 and 2-star as well, so Zoe a little bit more viable in the early game, even if she's still not all that great. Tier 2 champions, Annie has been slightly buffed. She's a bit better of a frontline with 5 more armor, and her damage output has been rather substantially increased. That being said, she still feels super underwhelming even after these buffs as a standalone unit. You really just want to be playing her in Mech Pilots. You don't really care to play her in just Sorcerers. If you're not running Mechs, don't run Annie, even after these buffs. Darius mana, he has 10 less mana, which means he casts his ability that much quicker, and Darius is great in the early game, and I think with the change to Space Pirates, I really want to see like a Darius composition really thrive into the late game. I haven't really seen it in this last patch, but with this new buff, he's going to cast 1 auto attack quicker basically, and that's his whole value, right? Is getting that dunk off, and if he can get some kills, and then he just chains it off. So that's a really big buff, kind of deceptively big, I think, for just a 10 mana difference. It's extra auto attack, basically an extra second faster on that ult. Lucian has been nerfed, lost 5 attack damage, kind of going with some of the cybernetic nerfs. They were definitely a little bit too strong in the early game. Still, if you get 3 cybers, get an item on Lucian, he's still going to be a big carry. Recon has been slightly reworked, and this is actually a really big change to Protector-style compositions. Essentially, he's going to have less maximum mana. Instead of requiring 150, he's just going to require 100. Wait, this is a little bit weird. It says total mana down to 100, then Recon mana 50/80. So I'm not entirely sure which one it is without checking it out on the PvE, but he basically has less mana, so he's going to cast more often, but his knockup radius is down to just 1 cell away, and it's going to target the furthest enemy within 3 hexes. This is, I think it's a big nerf, honestly. I think one of the big power levels, or the big power points of a Protector composition was Recon just doing a big AoE, applying like a Morellonomicon burn to everybody, big stun, big damage, and if you had a Spear of Shojin, which you often wanted in that style comp, he's casting pretty darn quickly anyway. Not like, chain knockup, but like pretty reliably quickly. This reduction in radius is huge. He's going to affect so many less opponents with this. And I really think this makes him a lot worse of a unit. We'll have to see exactly how it all pans out. Obviously, now Spear of Shojin is not going to be quite as required on him. He might do a little bit better with something like Xerath's Embrace with a lower mana pool. That being said, I am not thrilled to try to play a Protector-based composition anymore with this, what I think is a big nerf to Recon. Shen has been slightly buffed, gained 100 bonus health, and also a 1 extra second of duration on his ult at level 3. You only really ever saw Shen a 3-star in kind of that Master Yi reroll build. That's occasionally wanted to get Shen 3-star, but even then it was kind of underwhelming. But with an extra second on the duration, he is a little bit stronger in the early game. I could see that composition becoming a little bit more popular and more powerful. Occasionally you'd still see it, but like in the current meta, but with this buff, maybe you start seeing this kind of like early Blade Master build a little bit more. Tier 3 champions, Shaco has been nerfed, 5 damage loss just like Lucian. His bonus damage has been buffed though at 1 star and then nerfed at 3 star. So this is definitely a nerf to him because you rarely would play a 1-star Shaco. You more often than not want to get him up to 3-star, so he's going to lose quite a bit of damage off that and also multiplying it by his reduced attack damage. So that should definitely nerf Mech Infiltrators and Darkstar to an extent, but oftentimes you'd be loading up Jhin in a Darkstar comp, not really Shaco as much. But in any case, you definitely want to be loading up the Jhin now more than the Shaco if you're going for 6 Darkstar. Syndra has gained an extra cell of attack range, going to be attacking from a little bit further, and her ult has been buffed at 3-star. Now this was a little bit of a surprise to me, just like the Sorcerer buff earlier, until we get down to the item section. But Syndra was already really strong. I thought she was really strong. I thought compositions built around a 3-star Syndra, like the 6-star Guardians build, was very strong, very popular, could like very consistently get you into the top 4, even up in Grandmaster and Challenger lobbies. So to see this buffed was like kind of a surprise, but we'll get to some changes down below that I think still makes it fair. Tier 4 champions, Fizz has been slightly nerfed in terms of health, but gained a little bit of attack speed back. I don't think this changes too much about him. You're still going to play him in every mech comp because you need to. I don't think this really changes your priority on Fizz in any meaningful way. Jinx has gained a little bit more attack speed, very minor, 0.7, 0.75. The problem with Jinx, though, mainly is that Blaster-style compositions just lost to a lot of other meta compositions. They would lose to Mech Infiltrators, who could just jump on the Jinx. They'd lose to Aurelia, who could just go and dash and kill Jinx in one shot. And like the damage output was just too slow and too long of a build-up. I don't really think this changes much about it. I still think Blasters are going to be like more early to mid-game focus build, but by the late game, they definitely get outscaled by pretty much everybody else. Every other meta composition, at least. Soraka has gained a little bit bonus health, and her 3-star ult, if you manage to get a 3-star Soraka, has increased 10 times, has gained an extra 0 at the end of that, heals for 20,000 healing, which obviously is way overkill. It basically just says all of your units are healed to full. Whereas at 2,000, if it was cut in half by like a red buff or Morellonomicon or some other healing reduction, it would only be 1,000 healing, and that wouldn't heal most of your units to full. So that being said, I think I've had a 3-star Soraka once in this last patch, and I was thoroughly unimpressed with it. and I'm still going to be thoroughly unimpressed with it, certainly compared to something like 3-star Aurelia or Kayle or Jhin, who are like almost auto wins if you get them. Soraka 3-star, I don't think it's that great. She also got buffed at 1 and 2-star, so a little bit more viable there, but still, you're mainly just going to play her because you want either 6-star Guardians or because you just need some Mystics if you need that magic resist and healing. Not so much because you want 20,000 of healing. Wukong, his ult has been buffed across the board, and he got double damage at 3-star. Now, I played a little bit with a 3-star Wukong, and I was thoroughly unimpressed. Same with Soraka, where it's like, oh, he's got 2,000 damage, and I even gave him a Rabadon's Death Cap, so he's doing like 3,000 damage. And he did not do that much, because that's over time, and that's spread out, and he like moves around, so he doesn't ever hit one person for 3,000. And then, of course, it's reduced by their... or 2,000 before, and then of course it's reduced by their magic resist and so on. So he was actually fairly unimpressive with just 2,000 damage. So now he does 4,000. That should be enough to actually kill off the targets that he's hitting if you get him up to 3-star. So he's now a lot more viable to get up to 3-star, whereas before he was pretty unimpressive. Vel'Koz, the ray duration has been reduced by a little bit, but he's going to cast much more efficiently in smaller groups of units. So he's actually going to be targeting units a little bit better instead of kind of starting like way over there and then finally get into the unit at the tail end of his ult. So I think that overall this is a slight nerf to Vel'Koz. Losing half a second on that duration means he does less damage, but he should be a little bit more efficient in cleaning up fights, but he's going to be a little bit less oppressive at the start of fights where he's pretty much getting max value because there are so many units, so many enemy units around anyway. And finally, some small buffs to Aurelion Sol, a little bit of health, a little bit of armor, because Rebels had pretty much fallen off the face of the earth in this last patch after being dominant right as the set released. Okay, on to items. Chalice of Favor now also grants mana to the holder. So normally it would just give a 10 mana to everybody around it. Now it also gives 10 mana back to the holder. So it's kind of like a mini Seraph's Embrace. Seraphs would give 20 mana to the holder and 0 to everybody around it, and Chalice would do 10 to everyone around it and 0 to the holder. Now Chalice does 10 and 10, and that's really powerful. That makes it a much more viable alternative. You know, sometimes you just don't get double tiers, and you can't make a Seraph's Embrace, but now I think Chalice actually moves up to be a very high tier item. You probably want Chalice in a lot of cases, especially units like Sona, who are going to be casting a whole lot on a relatively short cooldown, and he kind of wants to be in the middle of the fight anyway, just to be spamming out those heals. I really like Chalice of Favor now on Sona. This is going to be a very good item, maybe even better than Seraph's Embrace. Deathblade is slightly reworked. Does not have any starting stacks, but each stack that you do get gives you 30 AD instead of 15. So a little bit slower to ramp up, but a little bit better if you do manage to get a couple stacks on it. Frozen Heart attack speed slow, slightly buffed. This is an item that you rarely would actually want to make, Frozen Heart. Sometimes you'd throw it on somebody like Cho'Gath if he's just going to be like alone up front, or like on a super mech if you had to, but it's never ideal. I don't think a 10% bonus really helps it all that much. It was already pretty efficient at that, but there's just better items to make with tiers and chainmails. Rapid Fire Cannon has now it triples your range instead of just doubling your attack damage range. That might make it quite a bit more viable for like melee carries to be given a Rapid Fire Cannon and then just be able to sit in the backline and just melee from a very long distance. That being said, for a lot of units that already wanted to use Rapid Fire Cannon, like Kayle, that doesn't really change too terribly much for them. Maybe it becomes a little bit more viable on somebody like a Master Yi, who can sit a little bit more protected and just keep on spamming that out and not have to like worry about getting up close to the opponents. Just could, you know, stay back behind a front line. But for the most part, I'm still kind of unimpressed with Rapid Fire Cannon. Shroud of Stillness, 1 hex width up to 1.5 hex width, so he's gonna it's gonna hit like an extra row of people. So Shroud of Stillness is pretty much still a late game kind of item when you're down to like a 1v1 or a 1v2. You know, in the top 2 or top 3. I still am never going to be too terribly interested in getting it any earlier than that, but it's a little bit nicer when you do get it. So in those very late game carousels, when you're in that final 4 situation, when you kind of have a bit better idea of who you're going to be up against, then I'm going to pick this a lot higher than I did before. Tear of the Goddess, this component has been nerfed. Now this is the nerf I was alluding to earlier about the sorcerers. It has gone from 20 mana down to 15 mana, and then all completed items have been adjusted accordingly. So this is actually a really big nerf. I thought that Seraph's Embrace, and to an extent Tear of the Goddess, was the best item in the previous patch, and because it went on so many builds. You could put it on Kaisa to let her cast a whole lot. You could put it on Syndra. You could put it on Vel'Koz. And those are like really powerful meta compositions that were built around a Seraph's Embrace out of Tear of the Goddess to just cast as soon as possible and repeatedly. And so this is really substantial. I mean, you lose 5 less mana. That's basically an extra auto attack. We saw what happened with Ziggs got 5 extra mana added to his cast, and he takes basically an extra auto attack to cast every time. So we're going to kind of see that with Tear of the Goddess too. A lot of units who would like do 1 auto attack and then cast with a Tear now need to do 2 or 3 or more. And of course this also nerfs Seraph's Embrace. Instead of giving 40 mana, it now only gives 30. I will say that this is a very slight buff to Sona in particular, who wanted Seraph's Embrace. If you're running like that, the Rebels like Blade Master with Master Yi comp or something along those lines, she would actually, with a previous Seraph's Embrace, because Sona has 40 mana, would just instantly cast as soon as the fight starts. Fight starts, Sona casts, which is a little bit worthless because all of your units are still at full health because the fight just started. So the healing doesn't do anything, doesn't cleanse any else. It literally just wastes that bonus mana. Whereas now, she'll only have 30 mana from a Seraph's Embrace instead of 40, so she actually has to wait a second or two to do that auto attack, get that mana, and then cast her first heal. So this is actually a very slight buff in that regard to Sona in particular. Although I think for pretty much everybody else who wanted more mana than that, this is overall going to be a nerf. I guess if you put a Seraph's Embrace on Aurelia who has 30 mana, it's totally irrelevant because you're still going to be max right away. So for the most part though, this is a nerf. And it definitely nerfs like Syndra, who really, really wanted a Tear of the Goddess and Seraph's Embrace to cast as soon as possible. So that's why I think they gave some compensation buffs to Sorcerers and Syndra earlier. And finally, Zeke's Herald has been slightly reworked. It only does 1 hex right adjacent, but it gives 30% attack speed instead of giving to 2 hexes, so 5 total units. It just gives it to 3 units, but for 30% instead of 18%. I actually think this is a pretty big change. I think this might make this item quite a bit more viable because it's rare that you're going to have like 5 units that really want to take advantage of a Zeke's Herald attack speed, but you'll often have like 2 or 3. So it gives quite a bigger bonus now. So I could definitely see this in like some Blade Master comps that want to stack up like either Master Yi Yasuo or like Kael Aurelia and just give them a ton of attack speed just to the more important units. You don't really care that you give like your Leona or your Malphite a bonus attack speed, but you really want to get those carries, and so they're going to benefit a whole lot more from that. So I think actually Zeke's Herald moves up quite a bit in priority. Otherwise, there's been a bunch of bug fixes that not too terribly interesting in terms of like actual gameplay perspective. There's a little bit of a buff to Wukong, who wasn't affecting enemies right at the start of his spell, but that's like really the only balanced thing, and I think Wukong has moved up quite a bit in terms of priority of the past couple patches with the recent buffs. And then other than that, down here in the mobile corner, you can read through some of these changes, but it's really just kind of like UI fixes and some other miscellaneous assortment of changes and updates, which all are good. Never want to take those for granted, but nothing too terribly interesting to talk about in terms of gameplay and balance. So where do I think the meta is going to go from this? Well, I think with the new galaxies, you're definitely going to see a higher priority placed on the like level up focused builds that want to get to higher levels and fit in a lot more units. I think that builds that relied on Seraph's Embrace and Tear of the Goddess in particular are going to be quite a bit worse for wear here, but hopefully Syndra and kind of like a Sorcerer Star Guardian still maintain some level of relevance because they got some other compensation buffs, but builds like Mech Pilots I think are going to be a lot worse off. So Kaisa is going to be a little bit less reliable of a carry. Shaco as well, which is fair because Mech Pilots were just definitely too good. I think with some of the adjustments to Deathblade and Zeke's Herald, you could definitely see some more either Blaster or Blade Master, like kind of attack speed based compositions rise up. and of course the addition of a Dark Star Sorcerer in Xerath probably buffs Dark Stars quite a bit. 6 Dark Star was already kind of on my radar of like a good composition that you'd want to play if it's available, and so an extra Dark Star really helps that out. And finally, I really hope that Darius and this 4 Space Pirate build find some traction. I'm kind of doubtful it's going to be like an A-tier competitive comp with just a slight buff like that, but I think Darius is going to be pretty viable in the early game, and I'm curious to see if I can make some Space Pirates work, even if they might not be the best thing in the coming meta. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and once again, this patch will go live tomorrow, so make sure you hop in and play some games with it, and let me know what you think down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.